She received a letter from her husband, but he died a year ago. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across Lily Clark's cluttered desk. Coffee in hand, she sifted through a stack of interview notes for her latest article. As an investigative journalist, Lily had learned to compartmentalize, to separate the horrors she reported on from her personal life. But for the past year, that skill had become essential to her very survival. It had been exactly 1 year since James died. 1 year since police officers had appeared at her door with solemn expressions. 1 year since she'd identified his body, pulled from the wreckage of his car at the bottom of Willow Creek. The medical examiner had warned her that the water damage made him almost unrecognizable, but she'd insisted. That was the kind of person Lily was. She needed to see things with her own eyes, needed concrete evidence before accepting even the most painful truths. She set down her coffee mug, noticing how her hands trembled slightly. The anniversary effect, her therapist called it. The body remembers trauma even when the mind tries to move forward. The doorbell rang, startling her. It was just the mail carrier, dropping off the usual pile of bills and magazines. Lily shuffled to the door, gathering the stack of envelopes. She flipped through them mechanically, bill, advertisement, magazine subscription renewal, until her fingers froze on a plain white envelope. Her name and address were written in a familiar slanted script she would recognize anywhere. Her throat constricted as she stared at the handwriting. James's handwriting. With unsteady fingers, she tore open the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Lily, I need to talk to you. I'll explain everything. Meet me at our place. J." The room seemed to tilt around her. She grabbed the doorframe for support, reading the note again and again. The postmark was from yesterday, not some lost letter from the past. The paper was crisp, new. The ink fresh. "This is impossible," she whispered to her empty living room. She turned the envelope over, looking for any clue, any explanation that would make sense. There was none. Just her husband's handwriting, a postmark from yesterday, and an invitation that couldn't possibly be real. Lily sank onto her couch, the note clutched in her hand. As a journalist, she'd built her career on skepticism and logic. This had to be some kind of cruel joke. Or maybe she was finally cracking under the pressure of the anniversary. Her therapist had warned her that grief could manifest in unexpected ways. She reached for her phone, considering calling her sister Diana. But what would she say? That she'd received a letter from her dead husband? Diana would be on the next flight from Boston, convinced that Lily had finally lost her grip on reality. "Think, Lily," she muttered, forcing herself to analyze the situation like she would a story lead. The handwriting was unmistakably James's, that peculiar way he crossed his T's and the slight upward slant of his letters. She'd seen countless grocery lists and birthday cards in that handwriting. But handwriting could be forged. "Our place" could only mean one place, the old gazebo in Oak Ridge Park, where they'd spent countless evenings early in their relationship. It was secluded, nestled between ancient oak trees, abandoned years ago when the park built newer facilities. They'd claimed it as their own private retreat. Lily paced across her living room, the rational part of her mind warring with a desperate, irrational hope that had suddenly sprung to life. She walked to the bookshelf and pulled down a framed photo, James laughing, his arm around her shoulders, the gazebo visible in the background. She traced his face with her fingertip. "This is insane," she said, but she was already reaching for her car keys. 20 minutes later, Lily parked at the edge of Oak Ridge Park. The late morning sun filtered through the canopy of trees, dappling the walking path with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Few people came to this part of the park anymore, another reason she and James had loved it. Her heart hammered in her chest as she followed the overgrown path toward the gazebo. She paused at a bend in the trail, suddenly afraid of what she might, or might not, find. What if this was some elaborate prank? Or worse, What if someone dangerous was using her grief to lure her to a secluded location? As a journalist who had covered her share of crime stories, she knew better than most how vulnerable people could be when emotion overrode caution. Lily pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to her colleague, Mark, at Oak Ridge Park, checking a lead. "If you don't hear from me by noon, call me." It wasn't much of a safety plan, but it was something. As she rounded the final curve in the path, the old gazebo came into view. Its white paint was peeling, and ivy had claimed one side, but it still stood proudly in the small clearing. Lily stopped, frozen, her breath caught in her throat. A man sat on the bench inside the gazebo, his back to her. The shape of his shoulders, the way he held his head slightly tilted, it was all achingly familiar. Lily's vision blurred with tears. She must be hallucinating. Grief could do that, couldn't it? Create visions of what the heart most desperately wanted to see. A twig snapped beneath her foot, and the man turned. Lily's knees nearly gave out. The face looking back at her was James's, the same warm brown eyes, the small scar on his right cheek from a childhood accident, the slight crook in his nose that he'd always been self-conscious about. "Lily," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered it. She gripped a nearby tree trunk for support, her mind reeling. This couldn't be real. She had identified his body. She had buried him. She had spent a year learning how to exist in a world without him. "This isn't possible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. James stood up slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might cause her to flee. "I know," he said, his voice catching. "I know this is impossible. But I'm here." He took a tentative step toward her, and Lily backed away instinctively. A million questions collided in her mind, but she couldn't form a single coherent thought. "You died," she finally managed, her voice stronger now, edged with anger and confusion. "I identified your body. I buried you. I've spent a year mourning you." James winced at her words, pain evident in his expression. "I know what you went through, Lily. I saw it all. I watched them pull the car from the water. I saw you at the funeral." His words sent a chill through her. "What are you saying? That you faked your death? That you've been watching me suffer for a year?" The implications were horrifying. The James she knew would never be so cruel. "No," he shook his head emphatically. "It's nothing like that. I couldn't do that to you." Lily's journalistic instincts began to assert themselves through the shock. She studied him more carefully. He looked exactly like James, but there was something different. A tension in his shoulders she didn't recognize. A wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Then explain," she demanded, keeping her distance. "Who did I bury, if not you?" James ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture that made her heart ache. "I don't know," he admitted. "I woke up a week ago in a motel room in Greenville. I had no idea how I got there or where I'd been for the past year. The last thing I remember clearly is driving home that night, the night of the accident." Lily's mind raced. Either this was James, somehow alive against all reason, or someone was playing an elaborate, cruel game. And if it was really him, where had he been for a year? "Can you prove you're James?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. A sad smile crossed his face. "You always were the practical one. Always needed evidence." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. "I found this in my pocket when I woke up." He handed it to her, and Lily took it cautiously, making sure their fingers didn't touch. She flipped it open and froze. Inside was her own driver's license, not a copy, but her actual license that she'd reported missing 3 weeks before James's accident. "Why do you have my ID?" she asked, her voice shaking. James looked just as confused as she felt. "It was in my pocket when I woke up. Along with this." He pulled out a house key, their house key, with the small blue rubber band she'd wrapped around it to distinguish it from other keys. Lily's mind whirled with possibilities, none of them making sense. If you've been gone for a year, why contact me now? Why not come straight to the house? I needed to understand what happened first, James said. I didn't know what I was walking into. The motel had newspapers. I saw my own obituary, Lily. Can you imagine what that's like? His voice cracked, and for the first time, Lily realized he was struggling as much as she was. This wasn't just her nightmare, it was his too. I spent the last week piecing things together, he continued. I found out about the accident, about the funeral. I was afraid to come to you directly. What if someone had done this deliberately? What if they were watching you, watching the house? A chill ran through Lily. As a journalist, she'd made enemies over the years. So had James, in his work as a corporate attorney. They'd both stepped on powerful toes. You think someone targeted you? Made it look like you died, she asked, her analytical mind beginning to work through the implications. I don't know, James admitted. But I woke up with your ID, not mine. That can't be a coincidence. Lily's phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from Mark checking if she was okay. She quickly responded that she was fine, buying herself more time. When she looked up, James was watching her with an expression of such longing that it nearly broke her resolve to keep her distance. Let me see your arm, she said suddenly, remembering something. James looked confused but rolled up his left sleeve. There it was, a small, crescent-shaped scar on his forearm. He'd gotten it on their honeymoon, a clumsy accident with a rental boat that had become one of their favorite stories to tell. Lily's breath caught. It was him. It had to be. No impersonator would know about that scar, hidden as it usually was beneath his shirts. No one could fake that exact mark. James, she whispered, her voice breaking. It's really you. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. James remained still, letting her set the pace. When she finally reached him, she raised a trembling hand to his face, half expecting her fingers to pass through him like a ghost. But he was solid, warm, real. The familiar scent of him, pine and something uniquely James, washed over her. Lily collapsed against him, and his arms wrapped around her, strong and secure. For one blissful moment, the questions didn't matter. He was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. But reality intruded as quickly as it had retreated. She pulled back, wiping tears from her cheeks. If you're alive, then who did I bury? The question hung between them, unavoidable and disturbing. James shook his head. I've been asking myself the same thing for days. I considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I'm a dead man. That someone else is in my grave. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, that I was involved in something criminal. We need evidence, Lily said, her investigative instincts kicking in. We need to understand what happened that night, and where you've been for the past year. James nodded, relief evident in his expression. That's why I came to you. If anyone can figure this out, it's you. Lily's mind was already racing, plotting their next steps. We should go back to the beginning. The accident. What do you remember? James's expression darkened. It was raining. I was driving home from that conference in Springfield. The road along Willow Creek was flooded in spots, but not impassable. I remember rounding a curve, and then. He frowned, concentrating. Headlights. Bright ones, coming up fast behind me. They were too close, and then, nothing. My next memory is waking up in that motel room a week ago. Someone ran you off the road? Lily asked, her journalist's mind cataloging details. Maybe. James rubbed his temple as if the memory caused him physical pain. It all happened so fast. Lily pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. The police report said you lost control on the wet road. There was no mention of another vehicle. She'd read that report so many times during those first dark months, searching for some detail that might make sense of the senseless. If someone deliberately ran me off the road, they wouldn't have stuck around to be included in a police report, James pointed out. A new, troubling thought occurred to Lily. What if it wasn't an accident at all? What if someone wanted you dead, or wanted it to look like you were dead? James's expression was grim. I've been thinking the same thing. But why? And who? Lily scrolled through her phone. 3 weeks before your accident, I was working on an exposé about pharmaceutical fraud at Meridian Labs. Remember? I was getting threatening emails. She paused, connecting dots. That's when my ID went missing. I thought I just misplaced it. You think this is connected to one of your stories? Or one of your cases, Lily countered. You were preparing for that class action suit against Clear River Energy. They stood to lose millions. James nodded slowly. The timing fits. The trial was scheduled to begin 2 weeks after my disappearance. What happened with the case? Lily asked. It fell apart. Without me to lead the legal team, Clear River's lawyers managed to get it dismissed on technical grounds. James's jaw tightened. All those families, counting on that settlement. Lily felt a chill. So somebody wins, either Clear River dodges a massive lawsuit, or Meridian avoids a scandal. And you conveniently die in an accident. But that still doesn't explain where I've been for a year, James said, frustration evident in his voice. Or why I woke up with your ID, not mine. Lily paced the gazebo, her mind racing. We need more information. Hospital records, police reports, anything that might tell us what really happened that night. She stopped suddenly. And we need to find out who's in your grave. The thought was macabre, but unavoidable. Someone was buried in James's place, someone whose identity might be the key to this entire mystery. Exhumation requires a court order, James said, thinking like a lawyer again. We'd need evidence of mistaken identity, and we can't exactly walk into a police station with me as Exhibit A. No, Lily agreed, but I can start digging into both companies, see if there's any connection we missed before. And we should look into that motel in Greenville. Someone brought you there, James. Someone who knew enough to place my ID on you. James's expression shifted, something dark passing behind his eyes. There's something else, Lily. Something I haven't told you. She tensed, waiting. When I woke up in that motel room, there was a note on the nightstand. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It said, "She's next. Run and she lives." Lily's blood ran cold. You think they're threatening me? That's why you've been careful about approaching me? I think whoever did this to me, whoever stole a year of my life and put another body in my grave, isn't finished. James handed her the note, his hand trembling slightly. I couldn't stay away, not once I understood what had happened. But by contacting you, I might have put you in danger. Lily studied the note. The handwriting was block letters, deliberately impersonal. This changes things, she said quietly. We're not just solving a mystery now, we're potentially preventing another crime. A twig snapped in the woods beyond the gazebo. Both of them froze, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. We shouldn't stay here, James whispered. If someone is watching you. My car's back at the main lot, Lily said, gathering her things. We should separate, meet somewhere public. The cafe on Main Street, Evan's Bistro. It's always crowded. James nodded, the plan making sense. 1 hour. Be careful, Lily. She reached for his hand, suddenly afraid to let him out of her sight. What if he disappeared again? What if this brief, impossible reunion was all they would have? I'll find you, he promised, reading her thoughts. This time, I won't disappear. As they parted ways at the edge of the clearing, Lily glanced back at the old gazebo where their story had begun years ago, and where a new, more dangerous chapter was now unfolding. The mystery of James's death had been replaced by the even greater mystery of his return, and the looming threat against both their lives. Who had James buried in his place, and why? Where had he been for the past year? And most importantly, who was watching them now, planning their next move? The answers waited somewhere in the shadows, in corporate files, in hospital records, in the memory gaps of James's lost year. And Lily was determined to find them, no matter the cost. Because this time, she wouldn't lose him again.